The movie begins in the early morning of April 9, 1940, when the Germans invaded Denmark, forcing their unprepared army to face them with limited time and resources. At this particular period, the Nazis were the most ruthless forces in Europe, viciously battling the Danish in the south of Jutland. It is April 8, 1940, in Søgaard, a day before the climactic battle against the Germans. Second Lieutenant Sand travels to the Danish military encampment to respond to emergencies. Simultaneously, 3 soldiers are walking to the area and talking amongst each other about being called for duty in the middle of their leave, with one believing it is just a drill exercise. The lieutenant then arrives, greeting Lieutenant Germansen, who informs him about gathering intel on the German soldiers' presence near the border of Kiel. Additionally, a train carrying soldiers was seen heading north toward the edge. The situation is worrisome, so Germansen will stand by and support the motorcycle unit led by Sergeant Bundgaard, who is assigned to closely monitor the area. Pointing at the 3 soldiers who arrived late, Germansen orders Sand to place them on kitchen duty for the rest of the week. The soldiers are then led to the firing range for target practice. Having a sip of cognac, the lieutenant continues the conversation by saying Norway's surrounding territory may be invaded next. Still, they will have to wait and see their motive for crossing the border. Afterward, all the soldiers are tasked by Sergeant Klostergaard to undergo an exercise in which they must change the tires of their bicycles within the time limit. Still unconvinced by their performance, the sergeant orders them to repeat the exercise in under 90 seconds. During break time, the soldiers chat for a moment while they eat. A messenger soon arrives to inform the commanding officers of a new directive issued by Lieutenant Colonel Hintz to abort the exercises and return to barracks at the soonest opportunity as a German column marches toward their kilometer-long borders. The lieutenants are instructed to make it appear the soldiers are called in for another exercise to avoid the spread of fear and panic. After the unit returns to the barracks at night, the sergeant reminds the soldiers to stay alert, wear their dog tags and keep their firearms ready while sleeping in their uniforms. Understandably, the soldiers feel tense, unaware of the situation, with Private Menig Graham doubting if it is still part of a training exercise. Sand feels sympathetic, believing the men have a right to know the truth. He lingers about it in his room as he loads his side pistol and finishes a farewell letter to his family. Later, the guards positioned at one of the border checkpoints see glowing lights from a distance, indicating enemy activity in the area. They immediately report it to the lieutenants, who convene with other officials and Colonel Hintz on their plan of attack. Hintz orders Checkpoint 3 to stand by and wait for further instructions. Almost immediately, Hintz connects a call with the head of the Jutland Division, pleading for permission to let his troops take a defensive position at the border. Unfortunately, his request is dismissed, as it appears that the Prime Minister is concerned that the Germans will retaliate over any Danish mobilization. Nevertheless, Hintz orders the men to move out with the troops. Sand then calls for Sergeant Klostergaard's assistance for a surprise inspection in the barracks. Meanwhile, the soldiers are bunkering down on their beds. Private Norskov writes a letter for his fiancée, keeping a picture of her close by. Elsewhere, Privates Anderson and Lundgren try to coax Private Lawson into giving them half his bullet rounds. Still, Graham intervenes, emphasizing that everyone is given a fixed amount of bullets. An argument follows as the 2 recruits berate their barracks head for being German. Things escalate when another soldier, Private Justisen, looks ready to fight back. Suddenly, Sand and Klostergaard burst in, with the latter reprimanding the soldiers for the disturbance and their attire. Sand approaches Norskov, asking him to finish his letter before bed. With the barracks under control, the officials leave, allowing Sand to smoke outside. He shares a cigarette with Sergeant Bundgaard, who hopes the lieutenant's bicycle infantry will catch up with his motorcycle troops at the borders. At the office, the anxious officials quietly talk about the German invasion when the communications officer alerts them about a radio transmission from Checkpoint 3. The guards disclose that the invaders have begun breaching the borderline and firing at their position. As the message gets cut, Hintz officially declares that Denmark is at war with Germany. An alarm goes off, waking all the soldiers as they hurriedly gear up for battle. They march outside, splitting into different platoons, with some riding motorcycles and bicycles. All the available firearms and equipment are distributed, depending on rank and division. At the courtyard, the lieutenants talk with Sergeant Bundgaard about holding the German forces off at Highway 10, so they cannot reach the north. They must do this defensive strategy until support teams from other Danish military divisions arrive. Germansen concludes by saying they will use Lundtofteberg as a rendezvous point once the road is cleared. He then gives a rousing speech to his platoon, declaring Denmark at war with Germany as of this moment and that they must fight valiantly to defend the nation. As dawn nears, each platoon heads to its designated position at the border. By morning, the lieutenants lead the Danish bicycle infantry company toward the German line. They catch up with Sergeant Bundgaard and his motorcycle platoon. The sergeant informs them that too many German soldiers are near the border, equipped with armored vehicles. He also says Lundtofteburg has fallen, but Germansen insists they must follow orders and defend the area, with Sand agreeing. The two platoons go their separate ways. Sand points out that they will need to split into 3 groups to intercept the German army effectively. One will be stationed near the trees, while another will be atop the hill manning the machine guns, with Germansen taking another group with him. After some minor assembly with the ammunition, Anderson keeps watching over the highway while others wait and worry. With the third group ready, Sand reminds them to focus some short bursts of gunfire on the armored vehicles as soon as Lieutenant Germansen signals the attack. Justison later complains to Graham about not being able to eat before moving out, as the private looks visibly worn out. Not long after, the German convoy appears on the road, breaking the eerie silence with the sound of their vehicles. As soon as they close enough to their position, the lieutenant orders Anderson to open fire at the armored units. Still, the bullets bounce right off due to the resistive plating. The enemy soldiers shoot back at the Danish army, moving toward them from all sides. Knowing they would go for their machine gun, the soldiers spread the gunfire, despite the struggle to get clear shots. Sand and the others are forced to flee, so he calls for Privates Anderson, Norskov, and Kolding to do the same, but they are deeply drawn into the enemy's attack. By some stroke of luck, Anderson takes down an armored truck, with Kolding providing support as he guns down enemy foot soldiers. Unfortunately, the latter gets shot by a tank, badly injuring him. Norskov performs first aid while Anderson continues attacking. Sadly, he fails to save their colleague due to the amount of blood loss. The second lieutenant finally gets to their position, grabbing the deceased Kolding's dog tag before fleeing the scene with the men, riding the bikes towards a nearby farm. The troops hide their bikes inside an empty barn and decide to hold their position inside the farmhouse, distressing the lady homeowner, who they ask to hide under the table. They wait for a moment, peeking from the window from time to time. When they realize the coast is clear, Sand quietly suggests they continue north to Sønderhostrup and meet up with Lieutenant Colonel Hintz to get new orders. He then makes Graham his second in command. Meanwhile, Private Norskov gets his wounds cleaned by the kind lady before being informed of heading out. The homeowner invites them to stay longer, but Sand refuses to hide out, thanking the woman for her hospitality. Outside, he informs the men that they may be all left now that they have no information on Germansen or Sergeant Boongaard's team. He tells them to honor their fallen friend, having died to protect the country. The small platoon moves out with their bikes and travels toward the next camp. Upon reaching the location, Sand reports everything to Hintz about the attack in Lundtofteburg, saying Germansen may have been compromised and Boongaard moved up north to defend their position from there. Offering the lieutenant a cigarette, Hintz reveals that no other platoons will come to their aid. He also tells him that the borders have fallen, forcing their units to retreat, though he thinks some have even surrendered. With the battle now taking place up north, the lieutenant colonel orders Sand to retreat to Haderslev and join the garrison to set up a defensive position. As Hintz leaves, the second lieutenant passes the information to the bicycle company, and they hastily move out through the woods. While stopping to change a flat tire, Sand checks the map to find the quickest way to Haderslev. Private Graham approaches him to imply that Norskov is lonely after grieving the loss of his closest friend. The second lieutenant then assures Norskov he will reunite with his fiancée back home and that he will never be alone. Meanwhile, Graham pushes Anderson to his limit, angering the private while fixing his bike. Before they fight, Sand reprimands both of them while telling Graham not to discuss an order given to him. Later in the afternoon, the bicycle company rides into a small town, where they see civilians flooding the streets to check the commotion. Fortunately, they reunite with Sergeant Boongaard, who tells them the people refuse to return to their homes, preventing them from setting up a military checkpoint. Having been informed of the new order coming from Hintz, Boongaard is furious, refusing to put his men on the line that far north. Still, Sand demands him to follow regardless of the risks. Elsewhere, Graham picks up a German propaganda flyer from a local man, who tells him it was dropped by the German Air Force. He shows it to Sand, revealing it as an appeal not to offer resistance to Norway. Suddenly, German forces are spotted heading toward the town. The platoon of soldiers hurriedly assists the townsfolk in evacuating the area. As gunfire is heard, a young boy, Frederick, is fatally shot, leaving his mother utterly devastated as she gets carried away by Private Lawson from the scene. The soldiers hide while countering the enemy fire. Still, the attack is too intense that they are forced to retreat to a safer position. Getting inside one of the trucks parked on the street, they escape the town and travel to Haderslev off the main road. On the way there, Graham and the soldiers spare bullet rounds to refill the heavy rifles. They later stop for a moment to witness German planes flying across Denmark. Upon reaching Haderslev, they find the road barricaded to bar them and the motorcycle platoon from entering. Sand pleads with the commanding officer to let them through, going so far as making him feel guilty over not responding to their calls for backup when they needed it the most. After settling the matter, Guard gives Sand a pack of cigarettes while declaring his support in defending the barracks. The second lieutenant then approaches Colonel Hartz, informing him of Hintz's plan. Apologizing for not sending reinforcements, the colonel explains that they needed to stay and defend the town. Sand shows the flyer, but Hartz had already been aware of it, believing it would not let them falter in their duties. He orders the second lieutenant and his men to position up the North Road, equipping themselves with new gear and ammunition. After some much-needed preparations, they head out to take their positions, with Anderson and Norskov serving as the front riflemen while the rest take cover near houses. German soldiers suddenly appear, scurrying around the town, prompting the platoon to open fire. The situation becomes more complicated as a German panzer tank drives up on the road and starts firing at the men, forcing them to retreat hastily. Though they try providing some cover fire, the Germans overwhelm them with many foot soldiers. As Sand attempts to guide his men away from the line of fire, Private Justisen gets shot in the back. He and Lawson immediately rush to his aid, trying to stop the bleeding while Graham provides more cover fire. With ammo running out and Justisen dying, the second lieutenant decides to lower their weapons and surrender to the German army. With arms up in the air, they come out of their hiding spot, announcing their surrender in Norwegian. Gathering in the middle of the town, the defeated Danish platoon shares the pack of cigarettes with each other. At the same time, the Germans check the dead bodies, one of them belonging to Justisen. Later, they are ordered to line up and climb aboard a bus. Before doing so, a German official, Lieutenant Becker, talks to Sands, with Graham as a translator. He asks why he and his men kept fighting, confusing Sand as he is unaware that the Danish government announced their capitulation hours ago. Visibly shocked by the news, he decides to ride the bus with the soldiers instead of accepting the offer to ride along with Becker. On the bus, everyone remains silent as they let their disappointment and exhaustion fill their mood. Private Graham cries, remembering the words of the German official. As they travel the long road, they see children playing on top of a German armored vehicle. Memories of that fateful day are recounted by the war veterans during some interviews. They express disappointment over the invasion and some relief that only a few Danish soldiers perished. It was evident that the Germans overpowered their armies, forcing them to surrender. Despite this, they believe what they did on the battlefield was noble, as they needed to fight for the country no matter what. One of the veterans believes that killing another person is difficult but necessary to achieve victory. The movie ends as their command reminds them that their efforts were not in vain, but for them, it cost them a heavy burden. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.